On Sunday morning, Pastor Elijah Reed thundered from the pulpit, calling the bikers who rode through town devils in leather. But life has a way of humbling even the loudest voices. By Monday, rain poured through holes in his roof until the roar of Harleys brought unexpected angels to his door. Before we start today's story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Also, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us to bring you more inspiring stories every day. The small-town church was packed, sunlight streaming through stained glass as Pastor Elijah Reed delivered his sermon. His voice was strong, sharpened by years of preaching. "Beware the devils in leather," he cried, pointing toward the open windows where the faint rumble of motorcycles echoed down Main Street. "They bring fear, chaos, and sin. They have no place among God's people." The congregation murmured, some nodding, others uneasy. Everyone knew the Hell's Angels had passed through town more often lately. Their patches, their thundering engines, it all stirred whispers of trouble. Elijah's wife, Margaret, sat stiff in the pew, eyes lowered. She had begged him to soften his words, but he refused. To him, the bikers were a threat to decency. What Elijah didn't know was that one of the riders, Caleb Stone Maddox, had stopped his Harley just outside. Leaning on the doorframe, he listened in silence, jaw tightening at every accusation. And though Elijah's words scorched the air, Monday would bring a test of grace. That night, the skies opened. Rain battered the Reed family home, wind howling through the hills. Elijah climbed into the attic with a flashlight and froze. The storm revealed what years of denial had hidden: rotting beams, sagging rafters, and a roof pocked with holes. Water poured in, soaking boxes of old family memories. "Margaret," he called down, panic in his voice. "It's worse than I thought." She looked up, her face pale. "I told you, Elijah. We can't keep patching it with tar and nails. We need real help, but help cost money they didn't have. The church barely paid their bills, and Elijah's pride wouldn't allow him to ask the congregation for more. By morning, buckets dotted the living room floor, catching the endless drip-drip of rain. Margaret sighed, her hands folded tight. "We'll pray," she said softly. Elijah nodded, though shame burned inside him. The man who thundered about devils in leather couldn't even protect his own home. And fate, it seemed, had heard every word. Monday afternoon, Elijah stood on the porch, staring helplessly at the sagging roofline. Clouds threatened another downpour. His shoulders slumped. His pride felt hollow. Then in the distance came a sound he had condemned the day before: engines. Dozens of them. The ground trembled as Harleys poured down the street, chrome flashing under the grey sky. Margaret stepped out, her hand gripping his arm. "Elijah." The convoy slowed, then stopped directly in front of their house. Caleb Stone Maddox, the rider who had listened to Elijah's sermon, dismounted. His boots thudded against wet gravel as he looked the preacher square in the eye. "You called us devils yesterday," Stone said, voice deep but calm. "But today you need angels." Elijah swallowed hard, heat rising in his chest. He expected mockery, maybe even retaliation. Instead, Stone tilted his head toward the roof. "We brought hammers, nails, and men. Let us fix what you can't." For once the preacher had no words. By mid-morning, the quiet neighborhood echoed with something unexpected: laughter, hammering, and the thrum of motorcycles parked neatly along the street. 80 bikers hauled ladders, ripped off rotted boards, and replaced shingles with precision born of grit. Margaret brought out pitchers of lemonade, her eyes misting as rough hands accepted the cups with gratitude. Children from nearby houses gathered on the sidewalks, watching wide-eyed as men in vests worked like a disciplined army. Patch by patch transforming the roof, Elijah tried to help, carrying bundles of shingles up the ladder, but Stone stopped him. "Preacher, let us do this. Sometimes you gotta let people prove who they are by what they build." By sunset, the roof was sealed, strong and gleaming against the fading sky. Rain could fall, storms could rage, but the Reed family would sleep dry tonight. And Elijah, once so sure of his words, felt something crack inside him. Not his roof this time, his certainty. That evening the angels gathered their tools, engines rumbling to life one by one. Stone approached Elijah, his gaze steady. "We didn't do this for thanks. We did it because people judge us without ever knowing us. Thought maybe this would speak louder than your sermon." Elijah's throat tightened. For years he had preached about redemption, yet refused to believe it could wear leather or ride steel. Now standing before men he had condemned, he felt the sting of his own hypocrisy. Margaret stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "You saved our home," she whispered. "God bless you." Stone gave a small nod, then mounted his Harley. The roar of engines filled the street, fading into the distance. Elijah looked at the roof, then at his wife. His voice trembled. Maybe I was wrong about what angels look like." Margaret smiled softly. "Sometimes, Elijah, grace wears leather." And in that moment the preacher finally understood his own sermon. By Tuesday morning, word spread faster than wildfire. At the diner, farmers and truckers leaned over their coffee cups. "You hear about the preacher's roof?" one asked. "Yeah," another replied, shaking his head. "Whole crew of angels fixed it. For free." Some scoffed. "Devils don't fix roofs." Others shrugged. "Maybe they're not what we thought." Elijah sat quietly at the corner booth, coffee untouched. Conversations pressed on him like stones. Everywhere he went, people looked twice, some with curiosity, others with judgment. When he returned to the church, Deacon Harris confronted him. "Pastor, did those bikers really do it?" "After what you said?" Elijah swallowed hard. "Yes, they did." The deacon frowned. "What does that mean for your sermon?" Elijah glanced at the cross above the altar, the weight of his own hypocrisy burning in his chest. "It means," he whispered, "I may need to preach again, this time with humility." That night Elijah's daughter Grace sat with him at the kitchen table. The roof no longer dripped, the storm held at bay, but silence pressed heavy between them. Finally Grace spoke. "Daddy, do you remember what you always told me? That God can use anyone, anywhere, anytime?" Elijah nodded slowly. "Yes, then why couldn't he use them?" she asked softly. "They didn't just fix a roof. They showed kindness when we didn't deserve it." Her words pierced deeper than any accusation from the pulpit. Elijah saw his daughter's eyes, innocent, untainted by prejudice, and realized she had grasped the lesson before he had. He bowed his head. "You're right, Grace. I judged by the leather on their backs instead of the hearts in their chests." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Then maybe it's time to stand in front of everyone and tell the truth." Elijah's throat tightened. For once his daughter was the preacher, and he was the student. On Wednesday afternoon, the low rumble of Harleys echoed once more through the quiet town. Congregants peeked from shop windows, whispering nervously. The angels rolled down Main Street, stopping in front of the church. Engines idled like thunder restrained. Stone dismounted, his gaze sweeping the stained glass windows. Elijah stepped out, collar crisp but hands trembling. "Why are you here?" he asked. Stone's answer was calm. "Because you owe your people the truth, and we want them to hear it." Gasps rose from the townsfolk gathering along the sidewalks. The very men Elijah had called devils were now standing outside the church, waiting for him to step up or step aside. Elijah's palms sweated. Pride wrestled with fear, but deep down he knew Grace's words were right. If he could not admit fault, he had no right to preach redemption. He drew a breath, glanced at the cross, then turned toward the crowd. "Then let them all come," he said quietly. Sunday came again. The church swelled beyond capacity. Congregants, townsfolk, curious strangers, and in the back pews 80 bikers in leather. The weight of their presence pressed against Elijah's chest as he stepped to the pulpit. He gripped the sides, his voice trembling at first. "Last week I called these men devils." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "But when rain fell on my own house, it wasn't angels with white robes who came to help, it was them." Whispered murmurs swept the sanctuary. Elijah raised his hand. If I believe in grace, I must believe it can ride a Harley, wear a vest and carry calloused hands. I was wrong. Forgive me. The room fell silent. Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. Grace smiled softly from the front row. In the back, Stone gave a small nod, respect etched in his gaze. For the first time, Elijah wasn't just preaching. He was confessing. After service, the congregation spilled into the sunlight. Conversations buzzed, some skeptical, others humbled. Children darted between bikes, laughing as riders let them honk horns and touch polished chrome. Elijah stepped outside, heart pounding. Stone approached, his shadow stretching across the church steps. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Elijah extended his hand. "Thank you for more than a roof." Stone clasped it firmly. "You preached with words. We preached with hammers. Maybe folks needed both." The other riders gathered, their presence no longer one of fear but of quiet strength. Townsfolk who once crossed the street now lingered, curious, even smiling. Elijah looked at Grace standing beside Margaret, her eyes alight with pride. For once he had lived the lesson he taught. He turned back to Stone. "Maybe devils aren't always what they seem." Stone chuckled, revving his engine. "And maybe angels don't always have wings." Engines roared, and the town would never forget the day Leather taught Grace. By Monday evening, the church was buzzing with debate. Some congregants lingered in the pews, whispering sharply. Deacon Harris crossed his arms. "Pastor, you embarrassed us. First you call them devils, now you praise them as saints. Which is it?" Elijah held his ground. "It's neither. They're men who showed grace when I showed judgment." Mrs. Carter, an elderly widow whose barn roof still leaked, wiped her eyes. "If those bikers could help the pastor, maybe they could help the rest of us." Gasps rippled. Some nodded in agreement, others muttered in disapproval. Elijah raised his hands. "I don't expect everyone to understand overnight. But I cannot preach redemption on Sunday and deny it on Monday." The room fell quiet. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, but this time Elijah wasn't afraid of the storm. He had faced worse from within himself, and he knew his congregation had to face theirs, too. 2 days later, Elijah drove past Mrs. Carter's farm. The old widow stood near her barn, staring at the sagging roof that had caved in during the last storm. She had patched it with tar paper and hope, but it sagged like a tired heart. "Morning, Pastor," she called, voice weary. "Storm got the best of me again." Elijah's chest tightened. He remembered her tears in the pews. He also remembered Stone's words, "We preach with hammers." That afternoon, the rumble of engines filled the valley. 80 Harleys rolled onto Mrs. Carter's land, dust swirling as men dismounted with tool belts and lumber. The barn was stripped and rebuilt in hours, boards replaced, beams straightened, shingles hammered firm. Children from nearby farms ran barefoot across the fields, watching in awe. Mrs. Carter wept openly, clasping Elijah's hand. "They did more in a day than I could in a lifetime." Elijah smiled through tears. "Maybe devils don't raise barns. Maybe angels do." That Sunday, Elijah stood again before his congregation. The pews were packed, not only with his flock, but also curious townsfolk who had heard about the barn. His palms sweated as he began. "I owe you honesty. My pride blinded me. I thought leather and patches spoke louder than actions. I thought I knew what devils looked like." He paused, voice cracking. "But when rain came, when roofs collapsed, it wasn't angels in white robes who helped. It was the very men I condemned." Some shook their heads, others bowed quietly. Grace, sitting in the front pew, smiled softly. Elijah's throat tightened. "I apologize for judging before seeing, for preaching about grace without living it." Silence hung heavy. Then Mrs. Carter rose from her seat. "Pastor speaks the truth. They saved me." Her words carried weight. One by one, heads nodded. And slowly Elijah felt the congregation's walls begin to crumble, like shingles falling from an old roof. The following week, Margaret suggested something unthinkable: invite the angels to the church picnic. Elijah hesitated, but Grace chimed in. How else will people learn the truth if they don't sit together? Sunday afternoon, the town park brimmed with folding tables, casseroles, and lemonade. Then the engines arrived, Harleys growling, patches gleaming in the sun. Conversations faltered. Forks froze mid-air. Stone and his riders dismounted, moving with calm purpose. They shook hands with townsfolk, served themselves food, and sat shoulder to shoulder with farmers and shopkeepers. Children begged rides on the bikes. Laughter soon replaced fear. Elijah stood at the grill, flipping burgers beside Bearclaw, sweat and smoke mingling. Margaret handed plates to bikers and neighbors alike. Grace played tag with kids while Angels watched fondly. By evening, barriers had melted. Leather and Sunday suits shared the same tables, the same stories, the same grace. Elijah realized then. A single meal had done what sermons could not. Weeks passed, but the memory lingered. The roof over Elijah's home no longer leaked. Mrs. Carter's barn stood strong, and the picnic had woven something new into the town. Understanding. One Sunday, Elijah closed his Bible mid-sermon, voice softer than usual. Church, I once mistook appearance for truth. I called men devils because of their jackets and engines. But I learned grace doesn't ask what you wear. It asks how you love. The sanctuary was silent. Margaret clasped his hand. Grace beamed. In the end, Elijah said, angels don't always fly. Sometimes they ride. From the back row, Stone gave the faintest nod before slipping out quietly. He didn't need applause. His brotherhood didn't need thanks. Their work spoke for itself. Elijah watched them leave, heart full. For once, his sermon wasn't about words. It was about a roof, a barn, and the unexpected angels who built both. Not everyone embraced the change. One evening, a group of townsmen cornered Elijah outside the grocery store. Their voices were sharp, their eyes hard. You're making us look weak, one snapped. Breaking bread with criminals? Calling them angels? Elijah swallowed, his palms sweating. I'm not calling them saints. I'm saying they showed us grace when I showed them judgment, the men muttered, unconvinced. They'll turn on you, you'll see. Elijah drove home heavy-hearted. He knew trust wouldn't come easy. Prejudice clung tighter than nails to rotten wood, yet he also knew silence would be worse. That Sunday he spoke plainly. Forgiveness isn't comfortable. Grace isn't easy, but neither is hate. We must choose which we'll carry. The congregation sat still, divided but listening, and Elijah realized leadership wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about standing firm in truth, even when it cost him. Weeks later, another storm rolled through the valley. Lightning split the sky, thunder rattled the hills. Elijah felt unease as rain pounded against stained glass. Then headlights pierced the dark. Harleys rolled into the churchyard, water sheeting off chrome. Stone dismounted, his jacket soaked through. Pastor, he said, voice raised over the storm, we heard the town might flood. Sandbags, pumps, we're here to help. The congregation peered out windows, stunned. Men they had feared now trudged through mud, forming lines to stack sandbags and direct water away from homes. Elijah joined them, sleeves rolled up, passing bags shoulder to shoulder. For hours, townsfolk and bikers worked side by side until the storm relented. At dawn, the town stood dry. Families saved their homes because men in leather came when no one else could. As the angels mounted to leave, Elijah's voice carried through the mist. You were the sermon tonight. Stone smiled faintly. Actions always preach louder than words. The next Sunday, pews overflowed, not with fear but with gratitude. Farmers, shopkeepers, mothers. They came to hear the man who had once thundered about devils, but now spoke of grace that wore unexpected faces. Elijah lifted his Bible, then set it aside. This morning I don't need to read. You've already seen the gospel in action. Men you feared worked through the night to save your homes. That is love. That is redemption. Murmurs swept the sanctuary, heads nodding. For the first time, the divide between leather and Sunday suits thinned. After service, families lingered outside, shaking hands with riders. Children sat astride bikes. their laughter ringing louder than engines. Margaret whispered to Elijah, tears in her eyes. "I've never seen the town like this." Grace tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy, maybe you should preach less with words, and more with hammers." Elijah laughed, humbled by his daughter's wisdom. For once he agreed completely. One crisp autumn morning, Elijah found a package on his porch. Inside lay a leather vest, not patched, not marked, just simple. Across the back, stitched in bold letters, was one word: brother. Margaret touched the fabric with trembling fingers.
"They gave you this?"
Elijah nodded slowly, throat tight. He had preached to thousands over his lifetime, but no sermon had ever changed him like this. The vest was not an invitation to ride. It was a symbol of respect, hard-earned through humility. At that Sunday's service, Elijah hung the vest beside the altar. "This," he told his congregation, "is not leather. It is a lesson, a reminder that God's grace can come from places we least expect." The crowd sat silent, reverent, and for once Elijah felt not like a man standing above his flock, but one standing among them, equal, forgiven, changed. Months passed and the town remembered. The roof on Elijah's home still held firm. Mrs. Carter's barn stood tall, and the churchyard carried the memory of sandbags and storm-fought nights. Elijah often walked Main Street with Grace, and every so often the roar of Harleys filled the air. Engines once feared now brought smiles, waves, even cheers. One Sunday, Elijah ended his sermon with words he had once never imagined saying. "Angels don't always wear white robes or sprout wings. Sometimes they wear leather, ride steel, and show grace when no one else will. Judge not by the jacket, but by the hand that helps you." The congregation rose in silence, not out of fear, but out of respect. Outside, Stone revved his bike, meeting Elijah's gaze with a knowing nod. No thanks were needed. Elijah smiled, heart-light. For the first time he understood. True faith isn't about who you call devils. It's about recognizing angels when they arrive. Pastor Elijah. Reed thought he knew what devils looked like, until the very men he condemned showed him grace with hammers and steel. That roof became more than shelter. It became a lesson. Never judge by appearances. If this story touched you, subscribe and press the bell icon for more.